I'm Chantal Thomas, talking with an expert on terrorism and the law, Professor Wadie Said from the University of South Carolina, who had been a federal public defender. So, Professor Said, you have spent much of your career working on various issues related to terrorism and the law. As you know, tomorrow is the 12th anniversary of the Guantanamo prison opening. What do you think are the prospects for the actual closing down of the prison, something that President Obama declared that he would do at the very start of his first administration?
Yes, I think that what we've been seeing, especially after the President Obama's post-2008 victory kind of inauguration promise to shut down Guantanamo, and then the battle lines kind of being drawn, and that there was a huge kind of congressional uproar and determination to not have that happen, because it would mean bringing people in detained there into the United States, and then Congress passing laws to actually thwart those types of plans. I think what you're seeing now is a little bit of softening on both sides as the Obama administration adopts a kind of a piecemeal approach to closing Guantanamo, trying to find places to repatriate the men who are held there, who have been cleared for release, which is, I think, the numbers are still something like 85, 86, 87 out of the 155 detainees left there have been cleared for release. And I think you're seeing now there was some legislation signed at the last month at the end of the year that allows kind of an easing of the Department of Defense's ability to repatriate people as long as they don't come to the United States. And there's been some trickle of articles in the media of people being repatriated who have been cleared for release to the Sudan, to Saudi Arabia. I think the issue has been that in the government's desire to kind of resolve this issue, you see some very questionable things happen. So in early December, there were two Algerian nationals who were repatriated to Algeria against their wishes because they were, they had a very grave fear that they would be mistreated by their own government if sent back. In fact, one of the detainees even said that he would prefer to stay at Guantanamo than to be sent back to Algeria. And given that kind of desire to get rid of these people somehow, to view that the people held at Guantanamo sort of en masse as a kind of a huge problem, a blight on our national conscience or something like that. I think we have to be careful in terms of what results it can lead to, as those results were, I think, clearly troubling, given that in other jurisdictions, the European Court of Human Rights has said you can't do stuff like that, send people to countries where they're going to be tortured in almost every case.
That's an interesting point that you raise, that one of the issues with closing down Guantanamo isn't just the fact that there are problems with repatriating in terms of reaching agreements to repatriate prisoners to their home countries, but that there are problems where those agreements do exist when the prisoners fear torture or abuse or persecution if they're to be returned. What would the solution be? So is the third country to be located, or what should the government be doing with detainees like that?
In each situation, there were, I think, third country possibilities that were discussed, but they were sort of dismissed out of hand in circumstances, at least as far as the reports are concerned, in circumstances that are murky at best. So we won't ever really know, I think, the full details of, why the government took this particular position in the case of these particular Algerian nationals. And we do have also the examples of, for example, the Uyghur population, the Chinese Muslim individuals who had been at Guantanamo and cleared for release. And, of course, the fear was if they were sent back to China, they would be mistreated, potentially tortured in violation of international human rights law. But on the other hand, China exerted pressure on third countries to not have them taken in, which is why their case sort of took a long time to resolve. But just recently, the last of them were sent to Slovakia. Well, I think advocates for detainees and activists in favor of shutting down Guantanamo have, I think, urged the government to, in a more serious manner, kind of investigate the possibility of third-party resettlement as a serious option. So I think that's something that the government, can pursue a little bit more vigorously and a little bit more transparently. The additional thing is perhaps easing the conditions of the detainees' confinement at Guantanamo. I mean, I think it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, where the administration of the detention facility changed, and all sorts of previous modes of operation or operating procedures in terms of allowing people to congregate, allowing detainees to kind of congregate and living in more dormitory style, open style detention camp, reverted to more restrictive conditions of confinement where detainees were subject to more restraint, separated, not allowed to congregate. Some of their privileged social, recreational, and even in certain cases religious privileges were restricted, leading to unrest in the detention camp. I mean, that's also something that the government could do, is maybe ease the burden of those detainees while they're there and their fates are waiting to be decided. They don't have to have such a restrictive policy, which in the end can produce something like what we saw last spring, which is a massive hunger strike.
One of the criticisms, the fundamental objections to Guantanamo, is that it's this sort of extra-legal zone, and some of the activists who are involved in protesting the prison there are saying that the government should either release these prisoners immediately or charge them with a crime and prosecute them under criminal law. But you've been involved in some of the prosecutions, for example, for material support, for terrorism conspiracy. And I just wanted to get your take on that. That's
what I spend a great deal of my time researching. And the chief law that the government has used has been this, ban on providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. The government designates groups as foreign terrorist organizations, and then, as a result of that, if someone provides material support, which isn't just money, it can be expertise, it can be even acts that bolster a group's legitimacy in the area in which it operates, which is an incredibly nebulous concept. It can be even speech, that if somebody, the Supreme Court has said that people can be, tried under the material support law for teaching a terrorist group how to lobby the United Nations to have its status recognized or its cause recognized. Even if that detracts from their violent mission, that can still be prosecuted. And the result can be, up to 15 years in prison for an individual count of material support or conspiracy to provide material support. So the sentences are not anything to be sneezed at. And the government's record when they try people on these charges has been very, very, from their point of view, successful in obtaining convictions. The sort of knee-jerk response has been, well, Guantanamo should be shut because we have Article 3 courts, the federal courts can handle these cases. And I think what we've seen is that, the courts have been very solicitous and very deferential to the government's national security arguments in these criminal type of cases, in terms of nothing to do with, of course, the principle or the propriety in a philosophical or larger sense of the experiment, the very tragic experiment at Guantanamo Bay. But in terms of sheer results, there's a real question of, is someone charged in an Article 3 court, in a federal court in the U.S. with, say, providing material support, in any better shape than someone at Guantanamo? And the numbers would say, maybe not. There's much more to explore there than I think we've seen in the national debate over Guantanamo.
Thank you so much for that perspective, and thanks a lot for talking with us today, Professor Said.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.